Alright, so I wanted to record a book review for a book I recently read by the name of Revival by Stephen King. I haven't actually done a review for a book on this channel in, I think, years. Um, yeah, I just haven't been reading much, I guess. Or I guess if I have, I haven't recorded a review afterwards, if anything. So, yeah, I decided to pick this up. It was like 13 bucks, so I said, fuck it, why not? Stephen King's my favorite author. This one seemed pretty interesting and not much talk about it though. Then again, I guess a lot of his more recent stuff that isn't Mr. Mercedes or that Shining sequel got a lot of talk, but I didn't read either of those. But I was interested in this one because apparently this is kind of more of a Lovecraftian style horror book, and that's that's kind of what this book was kind of hyped up as before it came out, I remember, and that's kind of the reputation of this book, and that's certainly true. Most of this book is actually just the main character growing up, becoming an adult, and then getting old, and kind of dealing with old age and slowing down and stuff like that. And then the Lovecraft stuff is kind of sprinkled throughout and kind of reaches a boiling point towards the end without spoiling anything. So that was one thing actually going into it. I was kind of wondering, because Lovecraft and I guess cosmic horror stuff, I guess tends to lend itself better to shorter stories, and this is like 400 pages. If only because in a shorter story you have less time to dwell on things, and also you can get away with not explaining things more, which I guess is true of horror in general, but I think for cosmic horror in particular, you really want to go for that shorter runtime, I guess if you can call it that, just because it gives the reader a little less to go off of, and it kind of in a way makes it more scary, fear of the unknown and all that. Which I kind of I have a theory that part of the reason the whole creepypasta thing took off like a year or so ago is I don't know. I think horror tends to lend itself pretty well to a little short shareable thing like that, and I think that's one of the strengths of that genre in that format. But this works out pretty well here. I don't know if you could. I'm sure there's some Lovecraft purists that would probably not, say like, oh, this isn't like a true cosmic horror thing or anything like that. It's more of honestly like a slice of lifestyle thing that has some Lovecraftian elements put into it too, which I'm totally fine with, and honestly I enjoyed quite a lot. If only because Stephen King's characters I find are just incredibly fascinating, and I actually think that's a large part of Stephen King's reputation that I think a lot of people from the outside looking in don't really get. I think a lot of people have this view of Stephen King that he writes these really schlocky horror things, and then also sometimes he writes something like, Green Mile or Shawshank Redemption. But honestly, I think the main draw of King, or at least why he's my favorite author, is just the way he describes characters' thoughts and just his characterization in general is just so. It's unlike any other author I've read. I think he's just fantastic, and he does such a great job with it. And I think that's a lot of other fans of King would agree with that statement. And I think a lot of people just kind of tend to write him off if they don't read much or read King at least. Because I do know some people are just like, oh, that's the Cthulhu one he wrote, and it's really not. This is more about the main character growing up, like I said. So, but yeah, I think it worked out great. There's just a really nice nostalgic feeling throughout the book, even though I didn't really grow up in the time period. And honestly, the main character of this book led a very different type of lifestyle than I did when I was younger. But yeah, it's really neat just getting into his head and seeing how he reacts to different life situations. And I don't know. I just like the protagonist a lot. Honestly, he felt to me like a mix of Larry Underwood from The Stand and Eddie. I don't remember Eddie's last name, but Eddie from The Dark Tower. who both of those characters are some of my favorite characters of Kings, and you kind of got the whole druggy musician thing going on again with the main character here. So that's pretty cool. I thought that was awesome. You can really tell King is into the whole guitar thing. He references kind of in the back of the book, and I've heard him talk about in talks and stuff before about his band, and a lot of that influence really comes through in the high school years and kind of the start of adulthood parts of this book, where the main character is kind of trying to making a living as a musician and also getting into drugs and stuff like that. And just in general, I think one of my things I really liked about this book was a lot of this one in particular seems like a lot of King's. Like I felt like King was inserting a lot of himself into this one, especially towards the end, which I want to discuss some ending stuff towards the end of this review because I think the ending's a really important part of this one, but I don't want to spoil it for people that are watching a review for this that haven't read it yet, obviously. So I'll get into that later. But I guess going more so into the supernatural elements, those mostly come from a preacher that the main character meets as a child, right at the start of the book, and they interact with each other and kind of stumble across each other in various manners throughout life. And this preacher is using electricity to perform some. He's basically just obsessed with electricity, and he starts to use electricity for like really bizarre medical healings and stuff like that, which is pretty interesting. I think the preacher is actually really that is probably one of King's stronger villains. I think he's a pretty interesting fellow. And also in general too, like this has kind of been tossed around as being the whole Lovecraft thing, but I think this is kind of also in a way. There's a lot of homage to Frankenstein in particular with the whole lightning and electricity motif. That's a big part of this novel, and it goes on more so with that and kind of the preacher's obsession with lightning, and it's pretty neat. I like him a lot. He kind of goes on to, I mean, this isn't too much of a spoiler, but he kind of goes on to be the antagonist, if there is one, of the novel, and he's a really well fleshed out villain. I think actually he's one of King's better villains, and he's I don't know, he's just an interesting guy. You can kind of always see where he's coming from, even if sometimes it's you know it's kind of a fucked up perspective, but you definitely you can believe he's very believable. I guess you can see why this person is doing what he's doing, and that's always fun. But yeah, other than that, I don't know if I have anything else more to say. I thought this was really good and really interesting read. I actually I feel kind of weird because I feel like this is one of King's better works, but at the same time, I don't have too much to say about it other than it's very good. I don't even think it's great. It's just very good, and it's kind of not really remarkable for anything. It's just a solid, enjoyable read, and hey, sometimes that's good enough, at least for me. So, yeah, if you're a Stephen King fan, definitely check this out. Even if you're not, I think you'd probably enjoy this. This is probably a good jumping on point if you kind of want to see what modern King's writing style is like, because he's written a lot of books over his life, and his writing style has definitely changed over time. But yeah, I do want to talk about some spoiler stuff, particularly the ending. So I'm going to give you a little pause in the video to click away if you don't want in on that, and I'll cut back to when I'm talking about it. Alright, so ending discussion. Like I said, leave if you don't want to hear this. So I think the ending of this book is I haven't like gone online or like really looked at any of the feedback, but I can see it being very divisive. It's definitely a change in tone, maybe not tone, but it's definitely things go from 0 to 100 real quick, and in a bad way. And like this ending was just straight up fucking depressing, which I don't mind. I can see a lot of people minding though. Pretty much everyone's dead or insane by the time this novel ends, which is I I mean, I kind of could figure that just because of the genre going in, but at the same time, just there's kind of a shock to it just because you get to know all these characters in this world, and it just everything goes to shit real quick. I thought that was pretty interesting. Uh, Going back to what I was talking about earlier, though, with King inserting some of himself into the story, or at least I thought so. Um, a lot of the later parts of this novel about just getting old in general and kind of starting to slow down a bit in life. And then in particular, a lot of the discussion of the afterlife I found really interesting. And I mean, King had that near death experience with the van hitting him, and just in general, that's kind of always affected his later works, very obviously. So I can totally see King having, some sort of fear of the afterlife, or some sort of connection or draw towards discussing that subject, which I don't know, maybe it's just the stuff I've read of his, but I haven't really ever seen him get as much into it as he did here. And I guess I kind of like, by the end of this novel, because throughout most of the novel, the horror elements come from just this weird secret electricity that is doing stuff that it shouldn't be doing, because that's not how electricity works. But then towards the end of the novel, like, you just get this really fucked up thing where King pretty much creates an afterlife that no matter who you were or what you did, just it's a fucking hell pretty much. And I find that super fascinating, and honestly that is such like a horrifying thing to me, and I'm sure to a lot of other people. And I guess the thing that I kind of I mean, I said earlier that I didn't think this did anything particularly remarkable, but I guess one thing I will give this novel, I don't really see too many horror works, um, at least, nothing I've really experienced, that kind of goes into just the horror of what if the afterlife is just shitty for everyone forever. Like, that's pretty terrifying, and I think a lot of horror stuff tends to focus more so on in the now and the present, and like people who are alive, and the horror comes from dying or fear of death. And this just goes beyond that and into what happens after we die. What if that's fucked up? Like, living and dying, that whatever, but after death, what if that's where all the bad shit goes down? And that's like morbidly fascinating to me. And I guess I was just kind of surprised because I haven't seen much other horror do stuff with that. So yeah, I thought that was pretty neat. Yeah, I really don't mind where the ending went. It's super fucked up and depressing, and honestly, probably one of the saddest endings I've encountered in a while in a thing. But I enjoyed it for what it was. It ended on a downer note, but hey, it was enjoyable, and I think it's okay that it went there. I'm okay with it not having a happy ending. It fits with what the story set up at that point, I guess. So yeah, that was my thoughts and opinions on Revival. It's a good little book. I recommend it. It's 400 pages. It's probably I got for like $13. You can probably get cheaper than that, honestly, if you look hard enough. And I'd say for that price, it's worth a read.